Is the mic on? Oh, the mic's on. There we go. Sorry. I can't actually see anybody out there. So welcome to another edition of the Primavera Pro sessions. This one, we are excited to talk about building resilience and the protection of mental health for artists and what record labels and publishers, I should say, can do to support that, and how we can help artists who are here to talk about that. This is one of a number of talks I've done about mental health over the past sort of 3 or 4 weeks. And I guess what I should preamble that with is that I'm the VP of Marketing for Downtown Music Holdings. So I have the pleasure of looking after a number of brands such as CD Baby, Song Trust, Fuga, and the various Downtown brands. But I'm also on the board of trustees for the UK's mental health charity for music, Music Minds Matter, which is why I'm here. And I think it's always good to kind of start these things off with a kind of why are you talking about it? And I have got to the point in the industry now where on LinkedIn I get approached being told, oh, you've worked in the industry for quite a long time, have you got any advice? Which, other than making me feel incredibly old, also kind of made me think about all the people I've spoken to over the years that I've worked in the industry, whether that's artists or whether that's executives. And I've seen some absolutely incredible talent come into the industry and 1 or 2 years later have left the industry and gone to do something else. And that's not just because of the opportunities available to them, it's because it can be an incredibly punishing industry. Whether you're on the artist side or the executive side, I think there's two kind of stories there. But today I think it's really important for us to focus on what we can do from the industry to support artists and songwriters and producers, and what are the needs of artists in the industry. So that's a bit about me and why I'm here. I'd like to kind of pass it around the panel and you all introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Gareth. My name's Veronica. My artist project is called Farce. I've been doing it in this form since 2017. I was in many bands beforehand, and I think just being in a band and making music with other people already is a socially and also mentally and physically really demanding hobby even to have, and to make it your job and then go touring multiple, most months in the year, most days in the year, I think is a path that many people go on without knowing how much it's really going to take out of their physical and mental power. And so I've had to learn the hard way that you really need to look after yourself, and I've kind of developed a few, I would say, methods to keep myself and my work load in check, but I've definitely not reached any perfect state of equilibrium. So I'm also here to talk about how can we work together. And I've worked with an indie label before that I did not feel have my best interests at heart in any way, and also not my mental or physical health. So although I'm from a DIY standpoint, I can't really speak to how majors attack the issue. So I'm really interested to see what you guys have to offer. And yeah, so I'm coming to this from a DIY artist perspective. And yeah, I'm keen to see where it goes.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Santiago Ricard. I am the head of A&R in Sony Music Publishing for the last 18 years, so for a long time. Before I worked in the record side, I worked in management offices. I had my own record company, so I had a long story in the music. And because of my position as an A&R, I know very well the problems of the artists and writers in which we are involved, the projects in which we are involved. And after then, I think it's interesting to consider, to speak about the differences between the artist problems, or the artist, the artist problems, and the writer's problems, because there are some important differences in some kinds of writers.
Hi, I'm Sundaraj Srinivasan, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I also head Universal Music UK's counselling service for artists. Before I retrained to work as a psychotherapist, I spent a long time working in the music industry as a publicist, working with artists, promoting them, both British artists and international artists of different levels. So what I have now done from that, I know what the lived experience of an artist is, what a working musician's lived experience is, and I combine that with my training and experience in mental health to set up and run this service for Universal Music UK, which I'll talk a bit more about, which is really just taking a proactive approach to mental health to support artists' well-being.
Thank you, all of you. I think the first thing actually kind of touches on your first point anyway, was there's actually a very wide divide on the different parts of mental health that affect different parts of the industry. So, you know, I can say from an executive point, I was a terrible artist, thankfully for the world, I never carried that on. But I can tell you that, you know, from an executive point of view, it can be quite punishing because you're relentlessly on a cycle of trying to kind of do things, you know. And I was saying before we were talking earlier, you know, you can be a junior exec working on the new Adele album. You could be spending every waking hour working on that album, and Adele gets that album out. It's amazing. She gets the plaudits. Well, you've also worked all those long hours, and you've been kind of punished for that. But then as an artist, you know, you have all of the traveling, you have all of the being on stage. But then from a songwriter point of view, you know, we said, you know, some of the songwriters and producers, they might not see another human being for days. And I mean, how do you think that, you know, what are the different angles that you think come from that?
It's a good question, really, because I've experienced both the producer and songwriter side of things, because I'm the main producer and songwriter for all of my music and also for other people. Mm-hmm. So I do also go through these kind of hermit phases where I won't see other people or won't do a lot outside of work. And I've also done, or am honestly grateful to do, the traveling and the touring. And I think in different stages of a career, or as I mentioned earlier, to me, of course, it was a hobby in the beginning. And then if you do choose to professionalize and to even get to the point where then players like a publisher or a label even come into play, I think the more you go into that direction, you have to, because you were talking, I think, also kind of about the validation and the dopamine and the I have to create, and then I get to show it to people, and people love it, and then I take all of my gratification, all of my validation, who I am as a person, I take that, and that's my most important thing, and if I fail, it's horrible. And I think the more professional you get, and the more you get to that level, you have to let that go a little bit, because you have to start thinking about it, okay, it's also my job. And then when I see it as my job, I can then have demands or ideas at least, or wishes to an employer, who then would be a label or a publisher, depending on the contract, depending on the relationship. I think it becomes this thing that before it was private, right? And it's like, how do I feel about my art, and how do I feel strong enough to go out and present it? To then, okay, now it's my job, and I have to think I also have rights. Mm-hmm. I also have labor rights to a degree, at least, even though I am, self-employed most of the time. So I think, for me personally, and also from the artist's perspective, there comes a private thing that becomes a professional thing, and that has to be looked at professionally.
I guess from a professional standpoint then, like where is the moment that you have to step in?
Whenever there's a need to step in, or ideally if an artist asks themselves that they need support, but then also what we're encouraging at Universal, and what people are starting to do is, it's hard because people working in the industry are not mental health professionals, and they shouldn't be expected to have to support artists with their mental health. But what we have done is raised awareness about where to go, so they know there is a service for artists to support their mental health. If they notice a sign, so if there's a change in the artist, their mood is slightly different, or they're not getting back to you, or they're cancelling scheduled appointments, then something may be going on, but it's not up to that executive or that person. It's unfair to put the pressure on them. But what they need to be aware of is where to go. Who can they go to ask for support and to get that artist support? Because it's really, really important that we get that support right at the start, before something can become a crisis.
Yeah. And I guess, touching on one of your earlier points in terms of like red flags, I mean, you're going to be speaking to a lot of people, and not to keep harping on about a conversation we had before this conversation, but you talked about, songwriters ringing people just to have someone to call. Where do you think the red flags are coming up with songwriters?
In the publishing side, if you receive a lot of calls from the writer, the problems are there. Oh, it depends of the kind of calls, no. But the problem of the writers and producers, but maybe the writers is worse, is that they always work in absolute isolation, no. In the major part of the things. Right now, because of the urban music, the things are changing a lot, and now everybody is writing the songs in different sessions with more people, and that's better. Because if not, if you are a songwriter, a classical songwriter, I don't know, if you are Dylan, you are so lonely in your house with your problems, with your family, with your money concerns, no? And then when you receive a call from this kind of writers, Santi, what's happened? The day before, the day later, Santi, could you send me again the requests of the open repertoires? And then another one. You say, well, here we have a problem. Please come to the office. We will have a meeting, or we have to go to have a lunch together and speak about family, about love, about football, and all kinds of things. No? And there is a part of the writers that is worst, is the audiovisual creators, the audiovisual composers. This kind of people are in his house, in his studio, working 10 hours per day, 2 months, working in a film, or working in a symphony, or working in a documentary, I don't know, without speaking with nobody. It's like a desert. And this kind of people needs more attention and more help than the other kind of people, no? Because they have not sessions, they have not a band with a schedule with concerts, with a tour. It's quite difficult to try to understand what's happening.
But it's ironic as well, because that used to be the artist that we encouraged. We used to encourage the tortured artist. And I was saying about, there are people who don't see each other for days, and it's almost like they've been sent to an island. Well, people used to go off and stay in castles and write songs, and then, would come back with the most torturous writing because they'd spent all this time on their own. And now I think we've kind of seen the devil in that and worked out we have to go back the other way and we have to support them.
We used to celebrate that, and actually we know, no, it's not, because it's literally killing artists, and we can't be celebrating that, and we shouldn't be encouraging that. We need to be encouraging artists to take care of their mental health.
And we are speaking about professional writers.
Yeah.
And there are thousands of people trying to write songs for himself or for other people without success. And this kind of people, these people is out of our radar. So I think the problem could be awesome, no?
Well, the problem is only as much as we know the problem is, right? Because it's only the professional songwriters and professional artists that we actually have any kind of real guidance. I mean, one of my previous roles was at TuneCore, and we had hundreds of thousands of artists all around the world who most of them weren't professional artists. What support do they have? And that's part of the reason Music Minds Matter exists. Is, there is a place for them to go, and why it was important. It was spun out on its own as its own charity. I guess starting this with, it's a safe space to say what you want to say and don't want to say. As an artist, where do you see the red flags coming in for yourself? Where do you know? It's, I don't want to say unraveling, because that sounds more extreme than perhaps.
When I can't really schedule when I'm going to work, and there's always at least 2 or 3 hours in a day that I block off to do something else, and I don't have a set thing of a set list of things that I actually want to do, but it's oh well, I have to get to this project also, or I have to do this also. It's where I stop planning for myself, which is how I manage myself and how I can be self-employed and do multiple projects at the same time and work them in blocks throughout the year, as all, I think, self-employed artists do, or most do, when I can't pinpoint what exactly I'm going to do, but I have to work. Like, I have to work, because otherwise I won't feel accomplished, otherwise I will feel like I deserve if I fail. That kind of thinking does, of course, weasel its way in very quick, and I'm very thankful to have a partner at home who will check me when that gets to that point. But I think that, again, is the thing. There's many people who don't have that kind of support system, and be it one primary partner or be it many friends or whatever, having a good support system, I think, is very crucial, of course, to any person's mental health. And for me, it's something I need to check me, because I do go into that cycle of I have to, because otherwise it's my fault that it doesn't work out, and that's it.
And the interesting...
You're an exception, because the normal use is more chaotic, no? No.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the interesting, one of the words, like you were talking about, kind of almost like fulfillment of being creative. And I think a lot of the time we tie mental health to not being able to afford food, which is obviously crucial, like not being able to afford food and to live is a very crucial part of why people have mental health issues. But there's also the creative part of it, where if you don't feel like you've got the outlet to be creative, it can have serious impact on your mental health as well, which is, you know, talking about DIY artists, like most of these people have got real jobs. I say real jobs, and I work in the music industry. The irony. I already like splitters as another. But, you know, they have jobs, and then they're trying to do this on the side. And that can also be incredibly impactful on their mental health. You know, I touched about it a bit earlier, but, you know, where do you think it is the responsibility of, say, a label, whether that is a major or whether that is a indie or a publisher? You know, where do you think it's their responsibility to come in? That's an open question for all of you.
Well, we push a lot our writers, our artists, and we have a responsibility, real responsibility about the mental health of these people. No? If you are trying to push someone to write a song, to finish a production, etc., you have to know that you are part of the problem. If you don't feel that this is not real, the problem are you. No? It's because of these things that all the companies, I think, all the majors, have a program of mental care with the artists. In our case, with the songwriters, is because we are part of the problem, because we need people absolutely sane, with them, the mental health absolutely sane and without problems. No? And it's because of this.
What about yourself?
Yeah, I'd add to that by saying I think when we think about responsibility, it shouldn't be about it's the label, it's the management, it's the artist. We need to think about responsibility collectively, because the music industry isn't a singular entity, it's multiple. It exists on so many levels that we need to think collectively. And actually, working from a label point of view, there's only so much you can do, because there are also artists who are saying they don't want support. They know it's there and they don't want support. So we need to work as a team across. So we call it in mental health, we call it multidisciplinary teams, which means it's not just one person's responsibility to ensure how they're doing. So in a music industry perspective, it could be someone, a family member, it could be a manager, it could be their lawyer, it could be their label. There are so many people, depending on what level you're at as an artist, as a person in the industry, there's so many people that can be involved in your team. Lean on them. And that's actually, we should all be looking at doing this collectively rather than pointing to one person to take sole responsibility, because that's a lot to carry.
Yeah. The question is that we are a team, but the creation comes from the same people always. No? That's the problem. And we are a lot of people, management, label, publishers, trying to push the same person. And that's the question. No?
What about yourself?
I appreciate the sentiment of everyone working together, But I do also think that change does come not just from collective ideation or from collective sensibility, but also from direct action that is a lot easier to do top-down than it is down-top.
Yes.
And I think, for example, something that could help artists that are actively trying to get signed or that are signed and are working within label and publishing structures is transparency on what it is actually that they do themselves and what actually their contact at their label or publisher really does for them and what they can expect to happen from that and what responsibility still falls on them. And I'm not saying that that transparency doesn't exist, but I have noticed in a lot of cases and in negotiations that I've been in myself or that I've found friends and colleagues in with major labels, is that the transparency of what kind of artists they're looking to sign, like what kind of people they're really trying to work with, and what kind of intricacies to a relationship there are between a publisher or a label and an artist on a major scale, are not transparent. And of course, my personal relationship, there's always every label and every division of a bigger label or publishing house. Of course, they're different people. It's all an office, and it's a micro organism that works in its own way. But I do think that there's a favorability for artists that are a little easier to push over and a little easier to make do more than people who are like, no, definitely not, this is my clear boundary. And I think if there's more transparency on what it is that they actually still have to do themselves, especially when it comes to terms like a 360 contract and stuff like that, it makes you feel like you're going to be 360 taken care of and you're going to 360 do nothing except for write songs. And that's never what it is. And I don't want to insinuate that labels are being intentionally nebulous about it, but maybe there could be more support legally for artists, or there could be more transparency on a work level on what it is who does.
Well, actually, coming straight back to you on that, and you mentioned about working as a collective. Like, how do you think artists, being an artist, how do you think they can come together to actually do more?
I do.
I say do more, being as in they're not doing enough. But how do you think being collective can help them?
That's also because in preparation for this, we were all talking to each other, of course, and that's also what I was trying to say. Employees of these big companies, right? You're having very senior positions also, but you're also employees of a company, and you also want to feel good, and you also often work more than you should, probably spend more time away from your families than you would like to. And that's something I also have come across so many times, young and not so young booking agents or managers or people in all kinds of positions in the industry also being extremely overworked and extremely at the end of their tether and just doing everything so that the show will go on. Right, so that's also something I don't want to brush over, that people who work in the industry, workers, there's people who have it worse than artists also.
Yeah, no. The question is the pressure is not only for the writers, the creators, the pressure is for the people who works in the industry, and the mental problems are probably the people who works in the majors or in independent labels or in management office, etc., and booking agencies. They have more stress and more problems than some of the creators. No?
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. But it's always the same.
Well, let's talk about that actually, because obviously you're both part of two programs. There, let's talk about your programs a little bit more of what you're doing at your very respective companies. Obviously, I understand that there's a limit to what you can say.
Yeah, I think it will be helpful too, because we're talking about what is being done, what's being done to support artists. And at Universal Music UK, we have a artist counselling program, which is a free, confidential support service for artists, which is, I think we've got to acknowledge, actually, we talk about mental health, but actually when we think about therapy is a privilege, it's expensive. It's to actually be able to access free therapy is great, and it's confidential. The service came up, and someone mentioned earlier on about it needing to come from the top, and it did come from the top. It was David Joseph and Selena Webb, who are at the very top of Universal Music UK, who identified a problem for artists with their mental health and needing some sort of system in place to support them, but they weren't quite sure what. But what they did know is it needed to be confidential and it needed to be separate from the label, because there's no way an artist is going to use a service that is in the company. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the times artists have conflicts with labels and we can't get away from that. And so I came into it in 2019. We started having conversations, and we started between myself, Selena Webb, and Claire Haffenden, who's the Director of Artist Liaison. Started thinking about what could that look like, because we didn't have anything to form it on. We had to create something. So we created a service that artists could access, where I work for Universal, but I'm an independent consultant. I head the label, and I do that away from Universal's head office in King's Cross. And what we did was we thought about, what do we need? How can we support artists when we're taking a preventative approach to mental health? That was David's key line, that they wanted to do. We can't be responding to crises. We need to basically make working conditions more bearable. And how can artists cope? So we identified 4 key areas to support artists, emerging artists, and newly signed artists, the ones that come straight into the industry. And then we looked at another key area that is often forgotten about, is artists who have left the company because all of a sudden their support system is gone. What happens to them? So they were another key area to focus on. And then how we traditionally understand artists needing support is artists in crisis, because it does happen. And a crisis can mean anything. It doesn't mean just the worst case scenario, someone's having suicidal ideation. It could also mean something that they've said online, that they've been cancelled. That can be a crisis for an artist because they think their career's over. That. And the final point, which is really significant, is a lot of artists don't want support for various reasons. And so, but people at labels are working with those artists on a one-to-one level. And so it's, how can those members of staff be supported so they can support that artist themselves? So we set that up, and that was launched in 2020. So it's only been going 3 years, but it has been running successfully. And what happens is, Claire Haffenden is the one who's day-to-day at Universal. She takes contacts from and referrals from members of staff, from managers, has those conversations, and then she passes them over to me. I am the only one who has the initial call with the artist to maintain that level of confidentiality and to maintain that separation. I would then have an initial call with them, and it's a conversation where I'm asking, what's going on for you? What's happening? What is your life like now? What's your current challenge? Who are the people in your life? So all these questions, I'm being curious about them to understand their experience right now. And what I'm essentially doing is, from a clinical point of view, is I'm doing an assessment of them, a mental health assessment. And as part of that, I'm identifying what their needs are. What do they want to get out of any kind of mental health support? Whether it's therapy, whether it's coaching, whether it's some sort of supportive group. I then start, once we finish the call, I would then take that away and think about who would be right for this. So I've got a pool of other therapists, support systems, that different people that could be working with artists. And then I go back to the artist with a choice of 3 different people for them to select who they would like to work from based on what they've said. So I'm making an assessment here. And this means not only do they have autonomy, they have choice over who they work with, but also I'm encouraging them right from the start to take ownership of their own mental health. Because if they're not going to do it, this isn't going to work. And that's been happening since 2020. It's still a new service, and we're still adapting it and changing it as it grows. But it's working each year. The number of musicians, artists using the service are increasing. And actually, it's across genres across the different labels, because Universal Music UK are the market leaders, and they're the biggest company. And so to have those artists using a service that didn't exist 3 years ago, we've come a long way, and we're making change within the company.
It's a funny way you can look at like statistics as well, isn't it? By saying that more people are using the service, you could say you think things are getting worse, or potentially actually they're getting better because they know to use the service. What about yourself?
Well, pandemia changed the rule of games between the companies, I think, and the artists and the writers, etc. No, during the pandemia, Sony Publishing changed a lot and started the Songwriter Assistance Program, in which there is a specific hotlines by phone 24/7 for the artist. And it's interesting because these kind of actions, these kind of programs are for the songwriters of the company and for the people, for the team at the same time. So it's interesting because we are all humans and we have a lot of problems during the pandemic. That exploit. No? In this hotline, I know it's confidential, but I know that there are a lot of people calling with real and how can I say, with real big problems in a moment. No, hey, I want to suicide me. No, or I have a very big problem. In this phone, there are some people speaking with the songwriters about depression, family, relationship issues, concerns about money, financial concerns. We have, for instance, a program in Spain with a person who is a specialist in the money, and we pay him, and all our writers have, I think, there are 3 hours for free, speaking about, hey, how can I have received this money, how can I, blah, 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 no? Etc. But this phone, the phone, the Songwriter Assistant Program, give you, if you call wellness information, do you have more information in a private web about childcare, education, adult care. It's absolutely private and confidential, etc. And during the pandemic, the problem, the problem of the writers that is the money is coming to the writers a long time after the exploitation. It's not like an artist. No, it's more automatic now with the platforms, etc. So sometimes people with hit singles in the radio, with hit singles touring in the country with different artists, etc., hasn't money. And during the pandemic, we received instructions from New York and from Japan, of course. Please speak with all your writers, and if they need money, we can give them special advances for survive during this time. Because if you are a musician and a writer at the same time, and the part of the musician playing with different bands was fall out with the pandemic, the money that are arriving to your house disappear during a long time. So and we gave around, I think, more than 100 new advances, only in Spain, of course, for the writers with survivor problems. No? So
and it's interesting because anybody out of the music industry would have no idea that songwriters don't get paid for at least 6 months, if you're lucky of getting your pay. And I think there are so many things about that within the music industry. I use this example quite a bit, that one of my best friends is a lawyer for the UK government, which I'm sure has its own problems in many, many ways. But when I, complain to him about the fact that I've worked long hours, or, that I've been traveling a lot like that, and it's such a music industry problem that you feel kind of awkward complaining about it, which I guess as an artist is even stronger because you're doing your thing, you get to live your life. How do you kind of like navigate that path of like trying to explain to other people like the pressures of your job?
Well, I try not to complain too much, you know.
You've got to
Because
complain.
no. I can't complain about the parts of the job that are compensated.
Uh-huh.
None of that to me matters. I think there's a lot of invisible work and a lot of expectation to pay money forward and to invest a lot of your own money and then not having any of that own money that I could throw at it to just see if I can advance everything myself. That part is very different, but about the part where I do get compensated and where I get to play my music, for example, in Spain. It's the first time I've ever been in Spain, you know? It's like this invitation from Primavera is, to me, a huge opportunity. So about stuff like that, I would never complain, but I can still acknowledge that it takes a big toll on my health to wake up at 4 and then get on a plane and then check in and come and do the panel and do the show and do this and that and that. But maybe that takes it from a small box to an even smaller box. But I think in the world of performers, we really need to speak about how physically taxing performing is. It's a very physically taxing job. And then again, when I'm thinking about that, I think about all the music industry workers behind the scenes, sound people, light people, that have an extremely physical labor, right? So that's actually the point where I want to kind of let go of the separation of physical and mental health, because mental health is also physical health, you know, and the other way around. There's no separating the two. I think in our more modern Western medicine, that separation is slowly starting to go up, and we're slowly recognizing the effects that the mental and the physical have on each other. I think in other medicinal schools that's been known a little longer. But yeah, I think I try not to complain, but I've been in therapy for 5 years, you know, that I pay for myself, that I have to, you know, do to stay present and stay doing also my job.
I get that. I've just looked at my watch and realised that I think we're coming to time. So, as I said, I wanted to make sure that we ended this with a takeaway, because I always think that, you know, most important thing is to actually have something that someone can take away from a talk and spread the word of some sort. And so I guess mixing two things, like what between the three of you, know, what is a kind of how to protect your own mental health or those around you, like core fact number one that you should go for? Start then.
I'd say we need to get away from the key takeaways, like we need to get away from seeing any kind of accessing of mental health support, whether it's therapy, counseling, whatever it is, as being something you only need when you're in crisis. We need to look at it being something that is a supportive space for you as an artist or someone working in the music industry, just simply to get to know yourself better, understand what's working for you and what's not working for you. And a key part of an artist's career is artist development. And that's how we should be seeing a mental health support. It's artist development. So you don't get to a point where things overwhelm you. And so the key takeaway is not to think of, I can only talk about my mental health or get support for my mental health if I'm in crisis.
There's actually something you mentioned about earlier about not getting to the point of crisis, and I think this matches up a lot with the idea that strong mental health is actually great for companies, because it means they don't have to rehire and they don't have to do all of these things. I think there are so many parallels of artists compared to kind of the executive side of things.
Yeah.
If you look after someone all the way, you're going to stay with them for longer. And even if it's just talking to your shareholders or whatever it is, they're going to make you more money if you look after them and treat them the right way. You looked deep in thought.
Yeah.
This.
No, I was thinking in another thing. Before that, I think it's very important for us to change our mind in all the industry, I think, but in the publishing part, of course. We don't have to consider the writers as our employers. We have to think in the writers or the artists, I don't know, but the writers as our partners, as our clients. And if you change this kind of thinking, change are coming along. No? The, I need to feel that the writer is part of the family, the Sony Music Publishing family. And if I feel that he's so close to me as a person and not as a number, the mental health will be better for me and for the writers as well. So I want to add this. No?
Yeah. And finally, from you?
My final thoughts are that it's always very insightful to talk to other people that work in a similar field, but also talk to other people that work in a completely different field and how they take care of themselves. And so I really appreciate this conversation. And I think as a DIY artist, as a self-employed artist, you have to take double the care.
No, I love that. I think, just to add my own at the end, the last one that I have is, it's a very British thing, I think, but we always start conversations with, "You're right," which is not actually a question, it's a greeting. And I think one of the funniest things I've found is that you can say to someone, "You're right," and they go, "Yeah, I'm all right." And you go, "Yeah, but you're all right." And that second, like just asking the question the second time often brings out a much deeper answer. And that's my only takeaway from this, is ask the same question twice when you're asking someone if they're all right. It's also quite threatening in some way. Are you all right a second time? I don't know if we have any questions. I can't actually really see what's going on. So do we have questions? Oh, a question. Is there there's a mic coming towards you, I think.
Hi, so my name's Thais. I run an artist development agency. I'm based between the UK and the UAE, Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And so I work with a lot of emerging self-releasing artists. And of course, as you can imagine, mental health, mental wellness, huge topic, and it's really important to me. So I appreciate this conversation. I just wanted to ask, at Universal, you mentioned the program where you get the artist to kind of do your check with the, like you do like a wellness check with them and so on. Is this something that's mandatory, or is it only when they kind of disclose they need it?
No, the point is at the moment, we encourage artists as soon as they're signed, make them aware of it and actually encourage them to use stuff. It's up to the artist. So we can't force anyone to do anything. It's up to them. But ideally, we just want as many people as possible to be able to at least have a check-in. It may mean that they may not need to actually use that service at that time. They don't need it, but just to be aware. And that's the thing. Even if they're just aware that there is this service there, and if they needed support, they can go to it. That's the point we want to get to. But it's not mandatory, and I don't think it's possible to make that happen. I don't think it's ethical to make it happen mandatory.
And do you think that there's ways that you can kind of put it into workflow where you're checking in on artists' well-being? Just because, like you said, sometimes it's better, prevention is a lot better than reacting to like a crisis. And sometimes that prevention shouldn't have to be when they're starting to show small signs. It should be, like, for me, it's really important when I start working with artists that I have conversations with them like, how long are you sleeping for a night? What do you do in your spare time?
Yeah.
Are you going to the gym? Do you like yoga? Like, just things like that. And I don't want them to feel compelled to start talking about their mental wellness, but I want to also just make sure that their environment's in good check.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And I think that's really important. I think I could sit here talking about lots of other things we're doing, but actually having a sense of self outside of music is really important. What do you do outside of music? Because if your whole identity and your whole sense of who you are is in music, if something's going wrong in music, it's going to affect your whole well-being. So actually, being into yoga, being into football, doing other things, being into cooking, whatever you like, having interests, passions outside of music's really important to just really have a healthier sense of self.
I can say that even from an executive point of view, that I think it's probably one of the few industries where it's very difficult to make the divide between what is work and what is play. Because, and like an example I give is like when I used to work at when I was working a lot of artists, I would go to a gig and I would drink 3 or 4 pints. Why did I go? Did I really go to see the manager? Did I really do those things? And then at the same time, it damages the relationships you have outside of what you're saying is work, because you can't clearly define what is what. And I think that's, that works both sides of the line. I think it's whether it's artists or execs, is you have to work out what is actually your job and what is the thing you want to do outside of this. And quite often music does play a huge part in the outside part of it as well, but it has to be different from what is your actual day-to-day job.
Thank you very much.
Have we got any more? Oh,
Yeah, I got a question. Yeah, I was just like, oh, easy. Hi, Omar Saad, SoundCloud. I had a quick question. So you mentioned that sometimes there's resistance from artists when it comes to mentioning mental health. So from a label perspective, have there been initiatives to try and find other ways to encourage it? And also because Santiago, you mentioned that there was also a time during the pandemic where, there were advances getting offered, and it made me think, like, is that also maybe a new model for, let's say, a recording or a publishing contract where, sometimes you set aside certain, creator advances for legal fees, but then maybe you have like a mental health fee or a wellness fee. I don't know if that's what things that labels are thinking about.
I know there's actually there's a few labels that now have stipends now for mental health, don't they? I guess it's, just before I pass it on to them, it's difficult because I saw a company maybe last year that was paying its team bonuses for the amount of hours they slept overnight. And so if they had what was classed as a full night's sleep, they would get a bonus at the end of the month. Well, I've got 2 young kids. If I get a full night's sleep, that would be an absolute dream for me, whether I get a bonus or not. So how is that a fair split between everything? But I guess just in terms of kind of encouraging it.
Yeah. Sometimes we have a resistance of the writers to admit that they have mental problems. No, the mental health is not really sane. No, or it's really good. And sometimes we have to convince him to go to the program and to receive conseils, etc. No, and regarding the advances, we did new contracts with the artists during the pandemic, with the writers. Mm-hmm.
I think to answer your question about artists who are not using the service, that's not any different to people who are not musicians. A lot of people, it's daunting to say you want support. There's still a stigma attached in wider society. Forget the music industry, in society as a whole. People don't like saying, I need help. And so what we need to keep doing, and what we're trying to do, is people who say no when we know that they need support, is just going back to them. It can take, and sometimes we find 6 months later, the artist says, okay, I'll take it. So we've just got to keep those conversations going without feeling like they're being pushed into something, because they've got to make that decision. They've got to have choice over this.
There's also, we can grab you after, so there's a couple of labels I can think of in the US that are small independents that are actually putting that into their contracts of like advances they can give to support mental health that aren't recoupable advances. Have we got any other questions at all? No, I think we're good. Okay, well, I'd just like to thank very much my amazing panelists for being on stage, and thank you all for joining me. Go and enjoy the rest of Primavera Pro. Thank you very much.